All right. Chance, could you confirm that you can hear me coming through right now? Excellent. Excellent. All right. So we have about 2 minutes, and then we will go ahead and get started. So I'm trying something a little bit different here tonight by using StreamYard for this rather than the actual YouTube. Well, Jesse. What's up, man? Chase and Jesse, the guys I can always count on. Yeah, no problem. And there's Chase. Chase, too. Chase, Chance, and Jesse. Yeah. Take your time, Chance. So, test the prophet. Boom. Everybody's here. It's official now. It is official now. This party can begin. How are you? TTP. That's what I call test the prophet. TTP. What's up? Hope you're doing well, man. Or woman. Who really knows what's behind the name? All right. It is 8 o'clock straight up. So I'm going to go ahead and begin so as not to belabor anything. Welcome to everybody. So happy to see you do more live streams. It's been a while. And so what I had to do this last time was I had to actually schedule the time. And once I scheduled it, I knew I had to hold up to it. Now, those of you who've been on the channel for a while, you know why I'm hesitant to schedule it. Why? Because as you might know, I was swatted and police officers came through that door into this house. Why? Because I had scheduled the live stream, and they were able to hack it and hack my phone, all that kind of stuff. So a little bit hesitant to do it, but we're crossing our fingers and praying that everything will go smoothly. So speaking of that, I'd like to go ahead and say a quick prayer as we jump into tonight's stuff. So if you would pray with me. Lord, thank you for this day and for blessing us and seeing us through this day and all the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs that a day holds. Thank you for bringing us here again. Tonight, we're going to talk and we're going to think and we're going to consider things. And I just pray, as always, Lord, that you would make your will known. The wisest thing, the smartest thing that I might be able to come up with, some great interpretation or some great thought. I don't want it to be from me. I want it to be from you. So I pray, Lord, that if I'm speaking something incorrectly, that you would just silence me and that you would just send your Holy Spirit to edify me and to give me the words to speak. So watch over us tonight. Bless everybody who's here. And we just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, yeah, I was swatted. I don't know who swatted me, so I can't I can't blame our denominational friends that might have done it, but who knows? But here's where we are. So let's talk a little bit. So if you've been following over the last week or so, all of a sudden there's been a little change. Not as much change as like Answering Adventism has gone through. Holy cow. If you've not been over there, you got to go over there and check out the Answering Adventism website. Amazing. Answering Adventism, their website. Miles showed me that a while ago. Holy cow. Next level. So it's really, really a great resource. So be sure and check that out. So I'm saying the changes I've made haven't been to that level. Okay. This has been like just lower level. Namely, what I did was I started an Intoxicated by Grace Facebook page why, because I think the why is the most important thing. And here's what it is. I really desire a community. Like, you guys don't understand how meaningful it is to me that the first few that pop in here, Chance and Chase and Jesse and Tess the Prophet, that you guys come in here, and the first ones, we're already building a community. And so that's meaningful to me. That's the first reason I wanted to do the Facebook page. The second is, oh my gosh, am I going up against? I didn't want to do that either. Doggone it. But he seems like he's always up. So I can't compete. So the second thing I wanted to say was, you can see this type of thing, scheduling an hour, or if we do this an hour, however long it is, scheduling this and sticking to it is difficult for me. I am a spontaneous, spur of the moment, when the Spirit moves kind of a person. So that's another thing that Facebook was going to allow me to do. I could do Facebook Lives there. I can put posts in there. I can put, things. I was trying, and will continue to do that on the YouTube channel. I'm really leveraging the community tab that you'll find in there, as well as I'm going to start using that playlist tab as well. I'll talk about that a little bit tonight, because I have placed some videos under a brand new playlist in there that I think are meaningful to me. So for me, what I want this to be, this and the Facebook page and anything else we care, is just it's a community, a way that we can kind of hold each other up. We can share with each other things a little bit easier than YouTube. YouTube seems to be more of a place of you're just receiving and not necessarily giving back, you and I. And so that was the idea there. So my request would be for you to, on this page, on the Facebook page, whatever, follow, like, share, click on here or on the other one for notifications, to be notified when something new pops up there. I would love that. Yeah. So that's the business at hand. I got that out of the way. Okay. Now I have a 32-page sermon that I'm going to do for you. So, this is what I want to talk about tonight. Okay. When I was still an Adventist, I was already, and I've talked about this before, I was already listening to pastors like Alistair Begg, R.C. Sproul, Chuck Swindoll. Early on, I was already listening to those sermons, even before I left the Adventist church. And I can remember getting a sense that this wasn't viewed as wise. It wasn't that they were going to say you can't do it or you shouldn't do it, but it wasn't viewed as wise. They would make comments like that, such as, well, I like them, but I don't agree with everything they say. I like them, but I don't agree with everything they say, And there's nothing wrong with that statement. I would probably make the same statement today. But my point is that I always perceived that they were kind of saying this is unwise. When I left Adventism, as we've talked about in the past, I kind of found myself like on the ocean, on a sea, not knowing which way I should go. Let's set aside for a second trying to understand what is the gospel. Okay. My departure had what had consumed my efforts. Listen to me. What had consumed my efforts were making sure I wasn't making a mistake, searching the scriptures to make sure that that the doctrine that I believed was incorrect was in fact unbiblical. What do you mean by that? I can give you a verse. Yes, you can give me verses until you're blue in the face. The problem isn't the verse. The problem is your interpretation, or the problem is the way you are applying the verse. That's what the problem is. Okay, you can never tell an Adventist they don't use the Bible. They use the Bible. They just use it incorrectly. So much of my time was spent on getting and feeling like I was doing the right thing. Okay. And so when I'm on this ocean, my first thing is like, I've got to try to figure out what the gospel is. And then you're trying to find, listen to me, you're then trying to find, what do I believe? And that statement, what do I believe? 4 little words are enormous. They are enormous because it means like, what do I believe about the Trinity? What do I believe about God himself? What do I believe about salvation? What do I believe about state of the dead? What do I believe about on and on and on? Okay? It's enormous. And you have some people that are born into a denomination. It is all they've ever known. It is all they've ever known. Like for me, I would love to know, like somebody like R.C. Sproul, who has since passed, but I would have loved if I could ever talk to R.C. Sproul, ask him how many churches, how many denominations until you landed in this one? Because I'm feeling like it was just this one. John MacArthur started in one. He was born and raised in one, but when he went into the church, into the seminary, he landed kind of where he is today. Alistair Begg, I would love to ask him, and I may at some point in time. I've asked him other things. I may ask him that one as well. The point is, when you leave the only denomination you've ever known, unless you've done it, you cannot begin to understand what it's like. You truly cannot begin to understand what it's like. So what I would say is, a person leaving Seventh-day Adventism or leaving the Baptist denomination, if it's all they've ever known, are going to find themselves in a very, very, very similar position. And that is like, what do I believe? What do I believe? 4 terribly difficult words. What I can tell you is, if you were to come to my home and look through my library, it's a bit of a stretch to call it the library. But if you were to look through my library, you would find writings by authors like R.C. Sproul, Alistair Begg, John Piper, John MacArthur, Tim Keller, Tony Evans, Stephen J. Lawson, C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis is one I've read for a long time. Charles Spurgeon. Did I ever tell you guys I actually sat in the church Charles Spurgeon preached at in London? Been there, done that. It was pretty cool. So Charles Spurgeon, John Calvin, Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, Luther. Listen to me, in my library are all these different authors. Okay? Yes, Tim Keller, amazing. God bless him. May he rest in peace. Great writer. I just read, oh, you might appreciate this, everybody. I just read this one by Tim Keller, Galatians for You. And we'll be talking about this in episodes to come. So love Tim Keller. But my point is this, ladies and gentlemen, do those authors, are they in full agreement? No. No. If you would go and dig deep, into the theology, you're going to find some pretty major differences. And that's one of the things I want to tell you. As you are leaving and you're trying to figure out, what do I believe? When you're trying to figure that out, daunting is a way that I would describe it. Daunting. What I have written down here is, growing up in only one denomination or theology is a double-edged sword. Number one, it is a complete theology that guides your understanding of the scriptures. Number two, though, it can be very hard to break away from. When you leave a denomination or a theology, you kind of then have to question everything, which is what I did, which I'm sure is what some of you did as well. And when you do break away, it can be very hard to find a replacement. It can be hard to find where should I go? It can be hard to find one. Hear me now. Hear me now. It can be hard to find one that you match with completely. You see, many of us, when we were born in our denominations, because it is all we'd ever known, we can sometimes confuse agreement with comfort. We can confuse agreement with comfort. I'm so familiar with some of these theologies that I agree with them. So you in your heart of hearts, if you dig down, you might not actually agree with it, but it's what you're certainly familiar with. So the point is, when you come out of that, to find that comfort or agreement again can be very, very difficult. Today, for me, haystacks are so comfortable. Today, when I try to look at my theology, and if I try to label it, which I am hesitant to, why? Because I know of denominational people like me, like the former me, that all they want to do is figure out what you are so they can grab their book and then they can know what to attack. Oh, he says he's this. Okay, so here's what you do. You attack these 7 things, whatever. But in all honesty, without any kind of embarrassment or anything, my theology lines up most closely with Reformed theology, covenantal theology. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, when I was an Adventist, do you think I knew what either of those theologies were? No clue. Had no clue. I knew Presbyterian. You know how I knew Presbyterian? Because the last Adventist church that I belonged to, we rented from a Presbyterian church. They would be there on Sunday. We were there on Saturday. Okay, so I knew Presbyterian. I knew Baptist. I knew those things. But I didn't know Reformed theology or anything. But as I left, that's where I lined up the closest. Okay? But there are going to be times you're not going to match 100%. And I personally think that's okay. Let me continue. As I left Adventism, and I'm going to guess some of you probably experience the same thing. You get to a point where you have to ask yourself the following question. What is the role of the law in the life of the believer? Especially when we look at the new covenant. After Christ in the church with a big C, in the church, what is the role of the law? And remember, I told you all the different authors that are in my library. Question, do you think that they all agree on the role of the law in the believer's life? Do you think they agree? The answer is no. They don't. Now, I'm not saying none of them, I can say this clearly and proudly, none of them are antinomian, meaning we're not under any law and you can literally do anything that you want. None of them believe that. But there is differences in the way that they view the law. Okay? And that's perfectly fine. But my point to you is, even though you and I would look at all Protestant, and I am specifically speaking of Protestant denominations tonight, if we look at all Protestant denominations, I believe almost universally there would be an agreement among all Protestant denominations that not all of the law is in effect or in any form of obligation to a new believer. Almost universally, all Protestants would agree that not all of the law. Most specifically, most Protestant churches would agree that the ceremonial laws are no longer applicable. Well, how? How is this possible? I mean, after all, I'm putting on my former denominational hat for a second and thinking, what would I ask? I would say, well, what verse do you have? I'll give you $1 million if you can give me a verse that tells me that the Passover is no longer obligatory. I'll give you $1 million if you can give me a text where blah, blah, blah. Okay. But if I'm asking that to the Protestants who are no longer keeping the ceremonial law, what is it? Well, in my heart, I really can't think of an explicit verse that says you no longer have to keep the Day of Atonement. You no longer have to keep the dietary laws. Now, sort of. You see, we have, for instance, in Acts 10, verse 15, you have Peter's vision where he saw all the unclean animals. The voice said, get up, kill, and eat. And Peter's response was, I can't do that. I've never eaten anything unclean in my life. Do not call unclean what I have made clean. And in so doing, the Protestant view is that God was declaring all foods clean. Now, to the former denomination, they're going to say that was just the Gentiles. Only the Gentiles were made clean. Everything else was still unclean. Incorrect. If that's the case, then you're just making God out to be the most confusing of all. That he's literally going to put food in front of them and say, "Get up, kill, and eat." And I didn't mean to really do that. I was talking about human beings. This is nonsense. But to me, like that, while it is not explicit, the point is clearly made. Jesus himself even said, "It is not what goes into a man that makes him clean or unclean. It is what comes out of him. It is from the heart." So this is why I would believe, and I believe many Protestants would hold, that the dietary laws are no longer obligatory. What about, for instance, circumcision? Galatians, because in Galatians, the Judaizers were trying to put those Galatian believers back under the law. What law? How much law? We'll get into that another time. But in two situations in there, Paul writes in Galatians 5:6 and Galatians 6:15 that ultimately, I'm paraphrasing both verses, and it comes down to this: circumcision or uncircumcision have no value. Circumcision, ceremonial law, circumcision, uncircumcision has no value at all. So let's talk for a second about circumcision. What was it a sign of? What was circumcision a sign of? Or a sign of? Well, it was a sign. I'm not talking about like what did it represent. I'm talking about it was part of a covenant. What covenant? The covenant with Abraham. Okay, it was the covenant with Abraham. The terms of that covenant were, God is going to do everything, I promise. God is going to do everything, I promise. And then later on, he then asked Abraham, go ahead and be circumcised. That will be the sign of the covenant. But it's still all about my promise. It's still all about my promise. Okay, I said I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. But circumcision was the sign of that covenant between Abraham and God. When we talk about the Mosaic covenant, what was the sign there? I'll wait till I see an answer in the chat. Let's see who, of everybody's here tonight, what was the sign of the Mosaic covenant? What was the sign of the children of Israel? Who remembers? While you're looking, I'm going to go ahead and read to you from Exodus chapter 31. Here's your answer. That is correct. That is correct. Excellent. Boom. You guys all of a sudden nailed it at the same time. Exodus, is that right? Exodus 31, starting in verse 12. And the Lord said to Moses, you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among the people. And he goes on. What were the terms? So stopping now, the Sabbath was the sign of the Mosaic covenant. Circumcision, sign of the covenant with Abraham, because Abrahamic is hard to say. It was the sign of the covenant with Abraham. Then you have the Mosaic covenant. And the covenant with Abraham, the sign was circumcision. Okay? With the Mosaic, it was the Sabbath. The point I want to make first off is that the covenant with Abraham and its sign, I'm going to say it again, the covenant with Abraham and its sign proceeded and superseded the sign of the Mosaic covenant. I'm going to say that one more time. The covenant and the sign of its covenant, the Abraham covenant, proceeded and superseded the sign of the Mosaic covenant. And we see that in John 7, verse 23. Well, what do you mean? In John 7:23, there was this question about what do we do when a Israelite baby boy is born and the 8th day falls on a Sabbath? What are we supposed to do when a baby boy on the 8th day? Do we do it on the 7th day and break that? Because the covenant said on the 8th day. So if the 8th day falls on Sabbath, do we actually do it the day before and break that? Or do we wait until the 9th day? What was the answer? No. You do it on the Sabbath. It proceeded and superseded the sign of the Mosaic covenant. And we saw something in Galatians that circumcision or uncircumcision have no value. Now, most every Protestant church that I'm aware of believes that no Christian is obligated to be circumcised. No men, okay? I don't know of a Protestant religion, a Protestant church that doesn't believe that, okay? Even to this day, Adventists, as far as I know, do not believe that Adventist boys must be circumcised, okay? I don't believe that. So what about the Sabbath? Here's my point. Here is my point. I'm telling you that nobody is keeping circumcision. No one feels it's obligated. Why? Because something happened. Jesus Christ fulfilled the covenant with Abraham. And so to continue to do that would be blasphemy, it would be heresy. We know we don't do that. But what about the Sabbath? The answer you're going to hear very often, well, it's a moral law. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something right now that I think I was a little surprised, okay? Because I'm not trying to keep anything from anybody. I'm trying to be very, very honest with you. We're told by some that the Sabbath is a moral law. It's not only Seventh-day Adventists that believe that. There are Protestant churches, Protestant denominations that believe the Sabbath is a moral law. Now, those Protestant denominations don't believe that that Saturday Sabbath is moral, but they believe that the 4th commandment to rest one day in 7 is a moral obligation. Okay? And therefore, they still hold up the 10 commandments as, listen to me, as moral law. Now, here's what I would say to that. Listen to me. Listen to me. If I ever tell you I don't have baggage that I carry from Adventism, I'm lying. I have baggage. I was born, I'm 3rd generation Adventist. Okay? I have baggage. I have uneasy, negative feelings about that denomination and about how I perceive they have done violence to the scriptures, how they have created a denomination in which the adherents rarely, if ever, genuinely feel confidence in their salvation through Christ. They rarely feel that. And that causes me a great deal of negative feelings. I have baggage. Therefore, I have to check myself to make sure that I'm not allowing that baggage to affect the way I'm viewing the Word of God or His commands to me. I have to make sure of that. While I believe that it is always moral, while I believe it is always moral to obey God, that doesn't mean that all of his commands are equally moral. And I'm speaking right now of the 10 commandments. Okay? I do not believe, I'll say it again. I believe that it is always the moral right to obey God in whatever he asks you to do. But I do not believe that every command that God gives us is moral in nature. Okay. And I personally believe we need to be making those distinctions. And I do believe that it's because of my background in the legalistic Adventist church that makes me so hyped up around this day. Whereas if you deal with a denomination, another Protestant denomination that says we believe that the Lord's Day should be kept basically the same way as the seventh-day Sabbath, my bet is they don't have the background in Adventism like you and I do. And therefore, they make these statements sometimes that Adventists just go, ooh, they just giggle because, see, they're making my point. And so it's because of that I want to say, no, like you can give them no quarter. You can give them no inch because they cling to that, expand on that, glorify that, and then you're in trouble. So I have talked about this before, and I'm going to now talk about it again because I think that this is an important point to make. This is to Adventists. This is to former Adventists. This is to the people who are not within Adventism or whatever. They're just listening. But I need to show you why I believe the Sabbath was a ceremonial law. Remember I said here earlier, most Protestant churches will believe that we're no longer under the ceremonial law. And this is I'm going to give you 4 or 5, why I believe. Now, not all of them are equally strong. I'll give you that. Okay. But the point here, enough talking. Let's get into it. First, and some of these you've heard before, so I apologize, but I'm going to do it again. First, it is my opinion, and I believe the opinion of many other scholars, that morality is the type of natural law that God has seen to fit into the place of the consciousness of all men and women since the beginning of time. There was something within Cain that knew he did something wrong. Was something etched in stone there that said, thou shalt not kill? No. But I believe there was a morality that God had already placed into the minds. And I believe this most likely happened after the fall. Maybe it was before, though I wouldn't have seen a reason for that. But I believe that from the fall forward, at least in the conscience of all men and women, was this natural law compelling them to what was right and what was wrong. Okay? This is precisely what I've talked about before when I mentioned C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity. In the opening chapters, C.S. Lewis talks about the natural law and how everybody seems to understand it. And what will happen is the moment you break it, you begin to explain away why you didn't really break it or why you were justified to break it. I'm telling you right now, all of that would be considered the moral law. Now, listen to me. I doubt seriously in the entire history of the earth that there's ever been a man who felt compelled by his consciousness, I should be circumcised. Hasn't happened. I certainly can't think of an adult male who would ever think, you know what I really need to do right now? I just can't see that happening. Hence, circumcision is not something moral. It is something far more ceremonial, or maybe even a health issue. I don't think in any time in our Earth's history has a woman ever been compelled by her conscience that it was wrong to wear clothing comprised of multiple fabrics. Becky, I just feel awful that this cotton and polyester blend, I just know I'm committing some type, this is just wrong. I need to justify myself. Well, the reason I'm wearing this is because it's never happened in the history of the world. Why? Because that's not a moral thing. That's some type of ceremonial law. I doubt in any time in Earth's history there's been someone who, prior to believing in God, felt compelled by their conscience that it was wrong to work on Saturday or Sunday or any day. Think about that. Somebody in their garden, like, I really shouldn't be out here right now. This is just wrong. Never happened on any day of the week, much less the Sabbath. So for me, this is one of the early, when I was beginning to question and going to be leaving it, this was one of those early ones like, yes, this doesn't make any sense. This is not moral in nature. Second, in Leviticus 23, we find a listing of multiple ceremonial holy days: Feast of Booths, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of First Fruits, the Passover. And in each one of those in Leviticus 23, it talks about how long it will be, what it should happen, what shouldn't happen. Oh, and I forgot one. And it was actually the first one that you find in that chapter, none other than the Sabbath. None other than the Sabbath. Now listen, I don't think there's any major Protestant denomination or pastor that believes those holy days I just mentioned aren't ceremonial. So I would ask that pastor, why do you think God, now what I'm about to say is a little bit dangerous. You'll see why. I would ask God, why would you put a moral law in the middle of all these ceremonial laws? Furthermore, if you look at all those other ceremonial laws, do you see consistency with this one? For instance, do they dictate a time of when it should occur? Yes. Do they dictate things that should be expected or prohibited? Yes. Now, you're saying, Scott, why would you find that dangerous? Because I say to the denominations that believe it's moral, ask them sometimes, why do they think the Sabbath is moral? What's an answer they will give you when you ask, why is the Sabbath moral? Because it's in the 10 Commandments. I reject that. But Scott, just now you're saying because the Sabbath is there among these other ones. Here's what I have written down here. If it looks like a duck, it sounds like a duck, and swims like a duck. Listen to me now. Here it comes. Not that it's in the water. Okay? I'm not saying, what's a duck? A duck is something that's in the water. No, it has to be more than that. And if you look, listen to me, if you look at the Sabbath in Leviticus 23, does it look like the other? Is there a lot of commonalities between it and the others? Yes. Now look at the 10 Commandments. Does the Sabbath look like any of the other laws around it? No. That is why I would again say this is ceremonial in its nature. Is it moral to obey God, whatever he asks you to do? Absolutely. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that every law he gives is moral. Was it a moral law that Samson not cut his hair? Was that a moral thing? Come on. So that's number 2. Number 3, in the commandment itself, you guys know where it is. Those of you who were born and raised Adventists, it's in Exodus 20, verse 8. This was engraved in your heads since you were children. Exodus 28, the 4th commandment. Why do I even have to open my Bible? I really don't. But this is what it says in the ESV. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord Hold on a second, Scott. Hold on a second. What in there seems to prove to you that it's ceremonial? Question. Is it moral for anyone, listen to me, is it moral for anyone to commit adultery? I'll wait. At any time, is it moral to commit cold-blooded murder? At any time, is it more? Okay. Is it any person that is able to do these things? They can just murder. David committed murder, not directly, but he had, I almost said Potiphar. Bathsheba's husband, what was his name? His name was Uriah the Hittite, right? Please tell me that was Uriah. He had him murdered indirectly. Was he fit? What? Because he was kind of removed, that make him? No, there's no one. Why? Because morality, listen to me, ladies and gentlemen, morality is for all people, for all time, in all circumstances. The commandment says you're not supposed to do any work. You, your maidservant, your manservant, blah, 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 blah. Listen to me now. This is in what verse is this? 10. At the very end of 10, it says, or the sojourner, the stranger who is within your gates. Well, hold on. What's the point you're really stressing here? If this were for everyone, why is it restricting itself to say you're not to do any work, you, this person, or the sojourner within your gates? The sojourners outside of your gates, it would, by the text, would seem to imply they are not under this obligation. Again, would murder been prohibited within the gates, but outside the gates, that's fine? Does that make any sense to anybody? No, because morality is for everybody at all times, in all circumstances, not ceremonial law. That's my third point. My fourth and my final piece of evidence, and in my opinion, is probably the best evidence that the Sabbath was a ceremonial law. And the reason I think it's the best is because it comes from Jesus himself. They haven't heard the Sabbath truth. That's exactly right. God put his hand over it so they couldn't see it. God tricked them. So, no, you can't do this to me, Test Prophet. TTP. All right. So the fourth thing that I feel proves that the Sabbath was ceremonial is from Jesus's own mouth. So this comes from Matthew verse 12. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. That's the header I have here. I'm sure you guys all know. I'm glad you guys all know this. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields in the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." I understand, ladies and gentlemen, I understand that what the disciples were doing was not breaking necessarily the commandment law engraved in stone, but breaking these additional restrictions that the Jews had added to it. I get that. Okay. But I'm not going to get caught up in that because that doesn't matter. You're going to see what I mean in a second. He said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who are with him, but only the priests. Or have you, by the way, that last part there, it wasn't lawful for anybody to eat that bread except the priest. Was that like part of like the instructions from God, or was it not lawful because the the priests had added that little bit. I don't think so. I think that it was actually not lawful before God himself, that bread was only lawful to be eaten by the high priest, or the priest, sorry. Verse 5. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? By the way, when they are going into the temple and working, they are breaking the Sabbath. They are working. They are absolutely working on the Sabbath. And his question, have you not read in your law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? The key point I have for you here is this. When his disciples are accused of breaking the Sabbath, listen to, and they're being accused of breaking let's call it the Jews' extra Sabbath. What does he compare it to? What does he compare it to? He compares it to breaking actual ceremonial law. He doesn't compare it to murder. He doesn't compare it to adultery. He doesn't compare it to stealing. He doesn't compare it to false witness. He compares it to ceremonial law, eating the bread of the presence, or the priests profaning the Sabbath by working on that day. Jesus compared breaking the Sabbath with breaking what kind of laws? Everyone with me? Ceremonial. And you want to know why? Because this is a little word. You may not have noticed it before, but it's really, really pretty powerful. It says here that the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are, anybody see the word that follows there? This is 12 verse 5. They profane the Sabbath and are guiltless. Think about that for 1 second. They can clearly break a law, not an extra Jewish thing that's been added, but the actual word of God. They can break that and are seen as guiltless. That's the ESV. King James Version, for those of you who are strict about that, the word there is blameless. NIV says it as innocent. They are seen as innocent. Was David seen as innocent when he had Bathsheba's husband killed? Can you think of a scenario in which David could have done something, a special day, a special time, that he could have had Uriah killed and been seen, listen to me, and been seen as guiltless or blameless or innocent? I contend to you today, it is impossible to break any moral law and be seen as guiltless, blameless, or innocent. But Levitical law, that's a different thing altogether. And I'm just going to give you a bonus one. And this one just hit me tonight. I've not thought deeply about this. So in 2 weeks, I may have to put a video where I go, that bonus one, kind of take that out. I didn't think that through. But it's this. Many of you have heard it thrown in your face that Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Okay? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Now, I'm not going to interpret this verse in the way you might think. Here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever heard someone say that the law represents God's character? You ever heard somebody say the law represents God's character? I'll wait in the chat. I hope I'm not the only one who's heard that. Have you ever heard somebody say the law represents God's character? Or something to that effect, yeah? Okay. What I believe, is that morality is who God is. When he says, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, that's because that's who God is. God is holy. Okay, and he is the epitome of morality. So morality, again, here's my thought. Go with me, but feel free to judge it. That's perfectly fine. Morality is as eternal as God himself. Morality is as eternal as God himself. God has always been, he always will be. Therefore, God's morality has never changed. He has always been moral. But this verse says the Sabbath was made for man. That seems to imply the Sabbath hasn't always been. Are we now just creating new morality? No. No, I don't think so at all. Both man and the Sabbath were made, and one was made to benefit the other. Listen to me. One was made to benefit the other. One was made to benefit the other. The Sabbath is underneath. Another one, Jesus said, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. How? Listen to me. That's like God saying, I am the Lord of thou shalt not murder. I am the Lord of. No, when he says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath, there's a video I want you guys to watch that I'll talk about towards the end. But the pastor talks about, and I don't know that I fully agree with it, but the pastor talked about Jesus literally not just putting an end to the law and the Sabbath, but an end to Judaism. There would be no more Judaism because I have fulfilled it. It basically, it becomes Christianity. And so when Jesus is saying, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath, he's saying, I can do whatever I want on this day. The reality is this. I was the only one resting on the seventh day. Nobody else had been working. No one else had any work to do. I was the only one resting that day. Then man is here, on he goes, and all of a sudden the fall comes. Guess who goes back to work? God. God goes back into work, slaying the animals so that the skins could be used to cover Adam and Eve. God goes back to work. He then exits that rest. Jesus said, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I'm able to do what I want on that day. I can do what I want. I can modify that day. I can change that day. I can do away with that day. But Scott, it says it's holy. So was the holy place. So was the Holy of Holies. Are they still holy? So was the ground where the burning bush was. Are you telling me to this day that plot of ground is still holy? No. No. So let me continue on here with this. And feel free to reach out to me if you think that my point was totally insane. Now, those are the reasons that I no longer am convinced from the scriptures that the Sabbath is a moral law and therefore binding and obligatory to me as a believer. Just like circumcision and other ceremonial laws, I'm not obligated to follow those. Now, I'm no longer an Adventist for more reasons than just the Sabbath. There are multiple major problems with Adventist theology that led me out and keeps me out. And we don't have time to address that here. I do not believe that Sunday replaces the Sabbath. I do not believe that all holiness has been transferred from the Sabbath over to Sunday. I do not believe that. I do believe there are some Protestant denominations that do. That's fine. And they believe that Sunday is the Lord's day and it should be kept similarly to the Sabbath. But ladies and gentlemen, in order for me to do that, in order for me to basically go, well, from Friday night, Saturday until sundown, Sunday, I can't do any work and I'm not allowed to exchange money. I would need clear scripture or strong principled arguments to be convinced me of that. And I do not find that. In fact, what was I going to say here? No, this is what I want to say. While I don't believe that, Um, I do view the Lord's Day as a day. It is my day of worship. And I think if somebody, listen to me, I think if somebody outside the church, an unbeliever, any of my neighbors, coworkers that are not believers, if they were to see the way I act on a Sunday, they might be led to believe that I view it in that same way, but I do not. But why would they believe that, Scott? Because on a Sunday morning, I wake up and I drive to my church for morning services, and then I come home afterwards. And right around 5 something, my watch goes off, and I'm in that truck and I'm heading back. Ladies and gentlemen, I should tell you right now, I love it. I absolutely love it. My wife can attest. I get excited. I get excited. Get excited to go because I just wonder, what am I going to learn tonight? How is God going to move me tonight? What am I going to hear? What's going to happen? I can't wait. I think that it's similar to something I feel. It's similar to something I feel literally every morning. Over the past 6 to 8 weeks, I feel like something has been refreshed in me, where when my eyes open and I look over the clock and it's 7:30 or 8 o'clock, instead of like, oh, there's this part of my soul that says, let's go. Let's get down there to that dining room table where the Bible is and multiple other books. Let's get down there and read. Where I have my prayer list and I have people's names written down here that I'm going to pray. Some of you who are here right now, I pray for every day. I can't wait for that. And Sunday is just like it is just a bigger, more powerful thing than that, because it's something where I go, I can worship, I can sing, I can sing, I can pray, I can have the word open to me, I can have an encounter with God. I can't wait for that day. But I do not do that because I think it's going to save me. I do not do that because I think it's going to save me. I find it interesting that to the outside world, when they look at Christianity, they think we're nuts. And in some regards, I think they're probably a little bit right. They see all these denominations: Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Church of Christ, Baptists, Southern Baptists, Free Will Baptists, on, post-millennial, premillennial, amillennial, Reformed, dispensationalist, covenant theology, new covenant theology. Thought you guys were unified. Thought there was going to be one church. This is what the Catholic Church looks at Protestants and thinks, what's wrong with you guys? I get it. But what I can tell you is all those things that I just mentioned have at least 2 things in common. They have at least 2 things in common. Number one, they believe that man is saved by grace through faith alone, not by works, lest anybody should boast. I would guarantee you, every denomination and every theology I just mentioned just now holds to that they believe that man is saved by grace through faith alone, not by works. And number 2, Sunday is the Lord's Day. Now, the reality is, the first one is the only one that matters. The first one is the only one that matters. But I'm just telling you, I find it interesting. I find it interesting that all those other denominations hold Sunday as the Lord's Day. I find it interesting that these groups that have spent so much of their time and efforts working through their various theologies and doctrines, all the time they spent on developing their creeds and their beliefs. Think about the centuries that are represented in these denominations. Think of the time and effort spent addressing heresies and false teachings. Think of the martyrs that have laid down their lives for the gospel. Think of those who refuse to bend the knee to Rome and Romans or to the Catholic Church. And every one of them concluded that the church is correct in worshiping on the Lord's Day. I'm not saying that our theology or doctrine should be based upon numbers. I'm just telling you. If someone is prompting or promoting something that goes against centuries worth of prayerful study, they would need to offer some significant biblical proof. And to this day, when it comes to the Sabbath, I do not find it. I do not find it. I got to tell you guys the truth. I had a meeting with my pastor a week or two ago. And one of the things I wanted to bring to him was about the Sabbath. And how, like, did he have any insight on how to address people who are trying to argue for that and stuff? And the first thing I'll tell you is my pastor said the letters he gets the nastiest letters he gets are mostly from Adventists. I'm not lying. God is my witness. Those are the words that he told me, which didn't surprise me. Little, very sad, but didn't surprise me. But he also surprised me when he said that he did feel that the Sabbath was part of the 10 Commandments, or the Sabbath was part of the moral law as found in the 10 Commandments. And for a second, there was like, oh no, oh no. But ladies and gentlemen, I cannot escape it. The four points, because I don't know about that fifth one yet. But the 4 points that I brought up tonight, I cannot escape that. I can in no way see that it is moral in any way, shape, or form. And I cannot be convinced that it's moral just because it was etched in stone. I've told you this before. The only reason it was etched in stone is because God started speaking first. He was speaking to, I don't know that it was ever God's intent that he ever etched it in stone. It was God's will that he was going to speak to the children of Israel. He got through 10 and they said, tell you what, let's send Moses up. You can talk to him. Now, you guys correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I think I've studied this. I think that I'm absolutely right. So that's why it was etched in stone. In a certain sense, I think the etching in stone thing is only speaking to your lack of faith. You couldn't even stand to listen to God talk to you. It was so terrifying. Anyhow, whether it's my pastor, whether it's whatever theologian, this is where I am. My continual place is like, Lord, if and when it's your desire to move me, but so be it. What I hope I present, what I hope is true about myself is that I want to live my life to please God. I truly do. And no matter what that might be, what that might look like, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. I don't believe that that's talking about the law per se. That's him saying, if I tell you to go over here, if you love me, you're going to go over there and do that. If you love me and I tell you to stop or start doing this, if you love me, you'll do that command. Got it. So if I feel moved by the Spirit to do something, then I will do that. I can only tell you that I have never, since I departed Adventism, I have never felt any other way about the Sabbath than that. So I was kind of a little discouraged, I'll be honest with you, because I have such high respect and love for my pastor. But I went out and I found a sermon by John MacArthur. Now, this is something I find very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me. If you would say, Scott, who have been the people that have probably most influenced your theology, it would be these four men: R.C. Sproul, Alistair Begg, John Piper, and John MacArthur. Okay? do your research. They all four of them would tell you their theology is Reformed theology, but they view the Sabbath as being a moral law or not differently. There is area of play in there, and in the playlist on the channel under the playlist, you'll find a playlist I created called The Sabbath, and there you'll find a sermon by John MacArthur in which he talks about the Sabbath, and he spoke precisely from my heart. His sermon wasn't one that I watched and then said, "Oh, that's what I believe now." I believed it ahead of time. I watched it, and boom, okay, got it. It was edifying. He has another sermon that he preached the following Sunday about the Lord's Day. If you've never seen these two sermons, I really highly recommend you watch them. They're excellent. Each is about an hour long. You can watch it on double time, and so you could watch it in 30 minutes, and it's perfectly good. I recommend you watch those. So what I'm going to say is this. I do believe that the Holy Spirit dwells within me. I do believe that I should be keeping the moral law, not for salvation. I should be keeping the law, not for salvation, but because it is the Holy Spirit who lives in me, it will happen. In Philippians 2:13, one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, Philippians 2:13, for it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. That's the ESV. King James says, for it is God who worketh in you both to will and to do his good pleasure. Why this verse means so much to me is because it's the Holy Spirit saying, listen to me, it's the Holy Spirit saying, I'm going to work in you even to give you the desire to do this, and I'm going to give you the power to do this. Because there's going to be things that you and I are going to be asked to do in the Christian walk that we do not have the desire to do. We do not have the energy. We don't have the strength to do it. But this text says, for it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. That's why I believe I will live, keep the moral law because of my own effort, because I've got to do it. And if I don't do it, I'm going to be lost. No, I'm already saved, baby. I am already saved. I will do it because it is God who works in me. It is God. So thank you guys for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you all have a blessed week. I hope that you are all part of a great gospel preaching church that lifts up Jesus Christ. And I hope those things for you so much. I wish that you could be in a church that you love as much as I love. So anyhow, thank you guys for being here tonight. God bless you guys, and we will see you next time. Have a great, great week. We'll see you guys.